the Center for Economic Development and Business Research out of Wichita State University. So I have been with the center for a little over 2 years now. I'm very excited to be here. So Bob, why don't you start us off by letting everybody know how this presentation came to be?
I did that just before we joined you.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so they're all prepped and ready.
Awesome. So who do we have in the room today?
I guess we'll introduce ourselves again. Go ahead, Terry.
Terry Dimmitt, City Council.
Sean Ryder, Grant County Economic Development.
Rachel Tubbs, Economic Development.
Chad McCormick, Grant County Feeders.
Casey Kruger, Pioneer Communications. Ken Warner, City Council.
Tim McCauley, City of Ulysses.
Marty Long, County Commissioner.
Mark Diaz, City Council.
John Duran, City Council.
Galen Pelton, Grant County Bank and Economic Development.
Jean Franco, Mixer Center.
Cindy Davis, Grant County Bank and Economic Development.
Catherine Warrior, Pioneer Communications.
Aaron Murphy, Skyland Grain.
Lindsay Campbell, Pioneer Electric.
Mark McGoy, County Commissioner.
John Martin, County Commissioner.
Corey Burton, Superintendent of Schools.
Omar Perez, Kansas Auto Economic Development Board.
Marita Hauser, Grant County Chamber of Commerce.
That's it.
All right. So are we ready to get started then?
I think we're ready.
All right, great. So if I can remember how to share Zoom. It says the host has disabled screen sharing. Is there a way to enable that?
The host is working on it.
Okay. Let's see.
Well,
While we're getting this ready, what are some really important things that we want to discuss today? I have my own presentation, but I also, this is open for questions as well. So what are your main issues and points that we want to discuss?
I'm just going to make you the host. See if that fixes it.
That looks like it will work.
Anybody have anything they're concerned about? I don't think a lot of them have never been to one of your conferences, so they don't really know what to expect here yet.
Okay, great. So then we'll just move on and give a brief agenda. So first of all, we have a number of indexes that we use to gauge the pulse of the economy from different perspectives. So today we're going to look at 4 of them. We have first up our current index, which looks at the highest level. If you had to take that question of how is the economy doing and smash that down to one line, one indicator, that's the purpose of this index. There's a bunch of components into that we weight depending on how relevant they are to the local economy in a county. So we have employment and wages, durable and non-durable consumer goods, oil production, wheat prices, and inflation. Next up, we have like 3 more indexes that are looking at a little bit different perspectives on the economy, because to households, the state of the economy is a different question than from the perspective of businesses and from the perspective of government. So first up, we have our Healthy, Wealthy, Wise Index to look at the perspective of households. We have our Business Dynamism Index to look at firms, and we have our Government Vitality Index to cover the government perspective. Each of these indexes are structured in a similar way, so we'll talk about how they work and the key indicators within each as we move through. And if any of these spark any additional questions, then don't be afraid to shout out and we can talk about it more in depth. So first up, the current index, that single line right? If you had to compare counties, we have that for every county in the state and also the state trend itself. Now, a common trend that is seen across the vast majority of counties statewide and indeed within the region is that relative to the base year, which is 2017, counties are a lot better off. That corresponds to an index value of 100. Grant County is one that kind of bucks that trend a little bit. It's gone down to 93.7. If I'm correct in recalling our initial conversation, this was one of the indicators that kind of prompted this presentation, is identifying the key factors that have been in decline that are relevant to Grant County. So as you can see on this current index line chart here, overall, Grant County has followed a different trend than the state average. Whereas Kansas experienced a decline and then in 2008 from the Great Recession, 2009 really, and then it sort of bounced back throughout the 2010s and into 2020. Grant County saw this gradual decline. Now, a lot of that has to do with the broad rural outmigration that we see, and we'll look at that in a little more detail in a little bit. But also it has to do with industry-driven trends as well. So we'll see that based on the concentration into just a few industries here. Questions on this?
Looks like we're good.
Okay, great. So first up is we call it our household index, but it's built into 3 different dimensions: healthy, wealthy, and wise. Each one of those has 3 different variables. This healthy dimension, which is what we'll talk about first, has the variables of the share of births that are low birth weight, the share of the population that is considered obese, and the rate at which people are visiting hospitals that are classified as preventable hospitalizations. Next is the wealthy. The purpose of that dimension of this index is to look at the risk within a local labor market. Each of these are by definition preventable factors that as they go up, you see increasing risk within a labor market because these are all positively correlated with absenteeism from work, increased healthcare expenditures, and so on. The second dimension, wealthy, measures economic opportunity. So we have 3 variables in there. We have the Gini coefficient, or the Gini index, which measures the distribution of income across the economy. So at higher levels of a Gini coefficient, as you get closer to a value of 1, it means that more and more of the income is concentrated into the hands of relatively few earners. That means that there is typically a less prominent middle class. And as Kansas is one of the states that has the most influential and dominant middle classes for the economy, a lower Gini coefficient, meaning meaning an income distribution that is more dispersed across the workforce, tends to signal better engagement of the workforce and more economic opportunity. And then household income, the change in household income is a major indicator because it shows are people, are households really having income available to them to engage with markets. And there's been a lot of movement there over the last 5 years. And then the poverty rate. This third dimension, wise, measures education within the workforce. We build that into at 3 different levels of educational attainment. There's the associate degree level, which also includes some college and no degree, and also technical degrees. We have the bachelor's level and advanced degrees, which is higher than bachelor's. So so each of those goes into the ranking, and then we'll also look at the sum of all of those, so the total level of education within the workforce. So a quick look at the state before we get into the county, right? So we rank this nationally, and overall, Kansas is near the national median. So these numbers that you see in the tables, we've changed the way this year that these indexes are presented. In the past, we have presented a flat ranking of every county within the state, 1 to 105. That can create some false impressions. So first of all, we need to understand that with any ranking, it forces somebody into first place and it forces somebody into last place. And that can be a problem when you have either a distinct advantage statewide or a distinct disadvantage statewide, because the person in last, if the state has a major advantage, is not always a bad picture. So what we have done this time is we've broken all the counties down into 5 groups, quintiles, ranking each one of them based on which quintile group they fall into. So a rank of 1 means that this is in the upper 20% of counties. 5 is in the lowest 20% of counties. And so this gives a little bit quicker of a sense of how these counties and how these states fare against one another. So Kansas, for the healthy, wealthy, wise dimension, is near that national median and has the characteristic of high obesity rate, low birth weights, generally lower wealth polarization, meaning a lower Gini coefficient, but a wage and income penalty. Now, our workforce is a lot more geared towards that associate and bachelor's degree levels, which we talked about as being really critical within that middle class. So what we want to see is where the county diverges from that trend. So this is a table of the rankings for Grant County and the region comparatively. Now, here we see some risk factors. So for that healthy dimension, Grant County ranks in the bottom 20%, and same for the wise dimension. However, economic opportunity is on the rise, and that actually puts it in the top 20% of economic opportunity. We'll see the variables where these come from. So looking at this first dimension of health, what we see is that there are concerns with the share of births that are of low birth weight and higher obesity. So one of the things that I want to point out is that all of the tables that you're going to see throughout this presentation are color-coded by their position relative to the state. What we want to see is all of these indicators for Grant County in the green, meaning they're on the better side of that state average, right? We know that the level term of low birth weight, obesity rate, and the preventable hospitalization rate is, I'll say, worse than the state average. You have higher rates of low birth weight by a little bit, and it has been increasing over the last 5 years by a little bit more than it has statewide. The obesity rate is notably higher and has been increasing more rapidly. That's something that is very common in rural counties. However, there is some optimism on the share of hospitalizations that are preventable, right? Although it is higher as a share of hospitalizations than statewide, it has seen a dramatic decrease in the share of hospitalizations over the last 5 years. It has actually more than cut itself in half. So that's a really good signal there that while there are risks from the household perspective, there are areas where there is marked improvement in the county.
Hey, Jonathan,
Yes.
the percentages that show up in the counties, can you explain those?
Yes.
What they're relative to, please?
Yes. So each of the percentages that are on the maps correspond to the level in 2022 for each of these variables. So when you want to compare, let's say, the low birth weight rate for Grant County being 7.4% in 2022 versus just to your south, Stevens County is at 4.3% of births in that category. The color scaling for all of the maps goes from gold being the highest performers to black being the lowest performers. So you can see.
But the percentages, that means 7.4% of births in the county are low birth weight, is what you're saying.
I guess that's an important thing. I'll mention what these percentages mean for each of these tables because the definition does change a little bit throughout.
And we got another question here.
Yes.
Is hospitalization rates insurance data or hospital reported data?
This is from the county health rankings, and so I would assume that this would be hospital reported data.
Thanks.
Sorry, say again.
I just said thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so the obesity rate is share of the population that is considered obese, and then preventable hospitalization, it is the share of reported hospitalizations. So moving on. Now, this is where there's a lot of optimism from the perspective of households, right? So the Gini coefficient, what we are wanting to see is a more robust middle class that is the primary driver of local economies. That corresponds to lower Gini coefficient values. And you can see in that first table that they are lower, and Gini coefficients have gone down by quite a bit more than it has statewide, which means your middle class is growing more and more robust over the last 5 years. This is great. And one of the primary reasons why is that the median household income has grown tremendously over the last 5 years. So it's gone from having a lower than state average median household income to significantly higher. And I will point out, a growth of 52.9% in the median household income is the highest growth as a share like in the state. So this is remarkable. So there have been select industries that have been growing really, really robust in Grant County that help offset some of the other risk factors and give a lot of economic opportunity to the population. One of the effects of that is that the poverty rate has, again, very nearly cut itself in half. It's gone from 10% of the population in 2018 being below the poverty threshold to only 5.3%. And so in both cases, that's lower than the statewide, but now it is at less than half of the statewide poverty rate. So this is a fantastic signal for economic opportunity and will be a major driver for the local economy in the future. So that, yes, while there are risks and associated with the local economy there and important risk factors to address, we are actually very optimistic that the trajectory of overall conditions within the county are going to start leveling themselves out and increasing because of this robustness of the middle class and the economic opportunity therein. Questions before we move on?
Yeah, the Gini coefficient, the closer to 1 it gets, the less dispersion you have in your money. Is that correct?
I'll phrase it this way. So,
okay.
The closer you get to a value of 1 means the fewer hands like that income is concentrated into. Like a value of 1 would mean that the total income in the entire county was earned by 1 worker. Okay. A value of 0 would mean that everybody earned the exact same amount, and that it was perfectly evenly distributed. Now, neither of those edge cases ever happen, but generally what the trend means is that values that are lower mean that there's a more robust middle class. Now, there are specific cases where perhaps there is very low Gini coefficient, so very low dispersion of income, or sorry, very, very low concentration of income, but incomes are very, very low. Like while that is a signal that there is theoretically more opportunity, we have to consider what that level of income is. So that's why we include both the Gini coefficient and also these other variables of like actual income level and the poverty rate, because it gives you different perspectives on that.
Did you find any explanation for why we went up 53% in median household income?
I do, and we'll actually get to that later. It's in
okay,
industry.
Very good. Anybody any questions on this? Okay.
So this third dimension of education. So workforce education, here's another reason why economic opportunity and overall household conditions has been improving. So the economy here is geared very strongly towards associate degrees, some college technical degrees to fill out the workforce in those sectors. And it's gone from having a lower share of the workforce in that some college and associate degree category than statewide to having a higher one, albeit by a little bit, but that means you have an economy that is more geared towards the industries that are present. Now, at the same time, you're having an increase of the share of the population that has both bachelor's degrees and advanced degrees, with both of those other categories growing faster than the statewide average. Overall, this corresponds to 6.7 percentage point increase in the share of the population that has a degree of or a certification of some sort. The assumption therein is that people who have higher levels of education, A, they tend to earn more income, and B, they tend to add more like higher productivity to their workplaces. So while you are still lower than the state average in the share of the population that has a degree, it's growing very rapidly. And as with any average, you have to consider that that can really be offset by like one or two major players, in this case being Sedgwick County and Johnson County, which both have very, very high shares of the population. So that statewide average, it is important to consider like your relative position there, but the growth trend is really, really important here in this case. Questions on this? Okay. So the second index that we look at is business dynamism. Now, there's three dimensions to this: labor churn, economic diversification, and expansion over the last 5 years. Labor churn, we measure by the share of employment in a given year was either a new hire or saw a separation. And we'll explain a little bit more about how this works when we get to that slide. Economic diversification, that shows how concentrated are you into one sector. There's a couple of different theories on how you can structure the economy of a county, and there's pros and cons to each. So we'll look at the concentration and diversification, and then what have been the trends over the last 5 years. So in business dynamism, overall, Kansas tends to struggle. It's below the median of states in labor churn. It's near that median in economic diversification. However, its growth over the last 5 years has been among the bottom 20% of states. So we need to consider that as we're going along. And now Grant County sees a problem in its business dynamism as well. It ranks among the bottom 20%, with it being near the median in labor churn, below the median in diversification, and in the bottom 20% for growth. However, while this shows significant risks, there is more detail that we need to consider when considering like what the actual outlook is for the county. So we will do that as we look at each of these variables. So first, in labor churn, I said that it was a little bit more complicated as to how this component worked and is interpreted, right? New workers to your economy as an inherent positive as that goes up. You're bringing in new labor, you're bringing in more talent. And a general interpretation a lot of the time is that separations are an inherent bad because it means that you're losing people who are retained. However, for the purposes of our index like construction, we actually have both of these like having higher ranking, like more preferable ranking in the index at both higher levels of new hires and higher levels of separations. The reason for that is because since 2020, there's been a huge fundamental change in the way that labor markets work. A lot of this has to do with the proliferation of remote learning, remote work technologies, and that has massively opened up the labor market to people living all over the state, all over the US. So you're able to attract a lot more labor that is perhaps better matched to the skill set in terms of the increasing share of new hires. But with separations, it means that your local workforce now has opportunities to work jobs that they have better matched skills for, that adds additional value to your economy. We call this skill job matching. It optimizes your labor force, and an optimized labor force tends to drive productivity. Now, the counter argument to that is that retention of workers is very, very important. So don't take it as an inherent truth that that ranking among like below the median in labor churn in Grant County means that you're in a worse position, because this depends on what industries you guys have, right? Here, it's a whole lot of cattle farming, beef cattle, and associated industries. This is an area where perhaps remote work opportunities are not abundant in that sector, to say the least. And so what we actually would say in interpreting this value is that having this lower share of separations than the statewide average is an advantage to your local labor market, because that means you've been retaining workers better. And there's really no substitute for those skills that are only developed at a place of employment that after like a significant period of time working there. However, there is risk in that lower share of new hires. It means that perhaps if local firms are trying to expand, they're having a difficulty filling those new positions. Questions on this? All right. Now, the second variable, diversification. Now, diversification is typically measured either by location quotients, which just measure, relatively speaking, how concentrated is employment and wages in a location. And then another variable called the Hackman Index, which a Hackman Index can be interpreted as basically the opposite of a concentration. How diverse is the employment, the establishments, and the wages within a county? I won't give you the technical explanation of how that's calculated, because that would be very boring. But what we can say is, looking at the map, higher numbers closer to 1, means that there's a greater diversification of employment, establishment, and wages within the county. What we see is, compared to its neighbors, it has generally higher diversification in its employment, in its establishments, and in its wages. Okay, so relatively speaking, you have a higher diversification of each of these than your neighbors, but it's still very, very low in terms of overall diversity. The highest concentration that we see, like the actual industries that this corresponds to at the high level, is natural resources and mining, which really it's beef cattle. It's less so of mining. And so when we look at this table on the left, beef cattle ranching and farming, right? That has, in 2022, that's 238 employees and almost $12 million in annual wages. So these locations.
Jonathan, can you zoom in on that a little bit?
I can certainly try.
There you go.
Is this better?
Yeah.
All right. Hold on. Let me try and get the whole table here. All right. So this is the 5-digit NAICS code industries, right? And I have them sorted by like high to low of the employment location quotient. So these are the industries that you guys have the highest concentration of. Interpreting that number, a value of 1 in either employment LQ or wage LQ means that the same share of your workforce is employed in this subsector as the nation, right? It would be the same fraction of your employment in that sector. So employment in beef cattle is 264 times greater a share of your local employment than nationally. Now, there's something else that I want to point out, is the difference between the LQ for employment versus wages. So while you're 250 or 260 times more concentrated in employment for beef cattle, it's more than 400 times as concentrated in wages. Now, what that means is that people tend to earn more working those jobs locally than they would elsewhere. These are where your real advantages lie in attracting and retaining labor. And so we'll see the effect of that like on the next slide. One other thing that I did want to point out here is that since 2019, which is the latest data that we have, or the oldest data that we have this level of detail for, animal production employment has gone from 219 employees in 2019 to, in the most recent quarter for which data is available, Q2 2023, it's gone to 298. So that's a significant employment, and that corresponds to an increase in the wage concentration from about 65 to more than 100. So the like how dependent your local economy is over time on that sector has been increasing. Questions before we move on? Okay, so this is what I promised we would look at a little bit more detail to. Now, the 5-year expansion for the total economy, which is what gets you your ranking like as a county on this, has shown overall a pretty significant decline over the last 5 years. Now, there's a couple of things we need to consider in that. 2018 was a very hot year for the Kansas economy overall. So there is a little bit of skew in it just based on this 5-year trend, right? But it also matters what sectors that growth or decline is experiencing. Okay, so while we have seen this rural outmigration effect, where overall total employment has declined by 16.6%, which is significant. Same with establishments and same with wages. I will point out that wages here is not the wage rate. It's not the average pay. It's the total wages that that the workforce earns, which is basically to say that the number of dollars that go into pockets so that it can circulate through the economy has declined in Grant County versus statewide. So that is a risk factor. However, where that growth or decline is seen matters. So I'll zoom in on this chart here. Now, this chart, can everybody see this okay? Or should I zoom in more?
I think we're good there.
Okay. So what this measures is competitiveness. This is a variable called shift share, which, if you'll humor me, I'll explain how this is considered. If you measure how the competitiveness looks at 3 different factors in a local economy. There is an industry mix effect, a national growth effect, and then there is a competitive effect. So the industry effect is what we would expect a particular industry to grow by over a period of time, given that industry's performance nationwide. So if this county saw the same growth in that industry as the nation did, we would expect that to add this many people to the workforce in that sector. The national effect is basically an indicator measuring the phrase, the rising tide lifts all boats. You would expect that as the whole economy expands, you would see an increase in employment overall. And that gets allocated out to different sectors. Now, the sum of both the industry and national growth effects is what we would expect the change in employment in an industry to be. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Now, if we compare that expected change in employment for an industry to what it actually did over that same period of time, that shows you how competitive your county was in attracting or retaining labor to that sector, okay? And so each of these sets of 3 bars for each of these industries totals 100% of the observed change in employment for that sector. Where you see green bars, you have a regional advantage, a county level advantage in attracting or retaining labor to your local market than we would have expected. These are your advantages. Disadvantages are the ones where you see these red bars, where of the total observed change, the region underperformed. Now, why this is important to consider is that in an economy that is so heavily driven by agriculture and forestry, fishing, and hunting, that's the level of data that is available at, you have performed significantly better than would be expected. So yes, while it is a significant risk factor in that the overall employment has declined, in that really critical sector, you have performed significantly better than would be expected. And I would wager that it's because of that significant wage advantage that we're seeing in that sector. Questions on this? Awesome. Group of rock stars here, because this is a complicated variable to really understand. So props to everybody here. So this,
Hey, Jonathan,
yes.
sorry. Yeah, this is Caleb Woods. Go back to that slide. What would that other services be? Is that just kind of a catch-all for anything else?
Services is kind of a weird category. It's like independent electronics repair that's not part of like a major sector. It's things like plumbing, is things like HVAC in certain instances. I can actually I can get you a more detailed list of it, but it's things that are non-public administration services that are not part of like leisure or entertainment services. So it's non-retail services. A lot of it has to do with automotive repair. A lot of it is gas stations, and then like independent repair of different kinds of things like electronics. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah, I just, with that being the only other one that we were green on, I figured it'd probably be good to know what that would be.
Yeah, in this case, I did find that actually, if I'll go back here, one of the major concentrations that we see is in this commercial and industrial machinery equipment repair and maintenance, and other scientific technical consulting services. Those would all fall into that category. Okay. So this third perspective that we're going to look at is government vitality. Now, we look at three different aspects of an economy to determine the vitality that its government has, right? So a government is basically the product of the market that it serves, right? So as the market grows, there is the opportunity for the government, the importance of the government and the services that it's able to provide, and the quality of life that it's able to support increases. So we measure that by change in the GDP, so the total output of the local economy, personal incomes, which is not the median household income, it's actual incomes like per person per capita. So that's an important distinction there, is that for this, it's per capita GDP and per capita personal income. And then it's the change in the county index. That high level view, are things overall expanding or contracting, is the growth of your market. The second is the underlying elements that drive that market. We measure that by the prime age share, which is the share of the workforce that is between the ages of 20 and 54. This is the core working age population that A, tends to have the highest engagement in the workforce, B, tends to have the highest productivity for the workforce, and C, tends to have the least absenteeism for, like while they're engaged within the workforce. It tends to be adding the most value per worker to your workforce. At higher shares of the workforce in that prime age category, it tends to mean that you have a more efficient and productive workforce. This mobility variable, what that is the it's called inward mobility share. So the census is great in that it provides data on where people are moving from and where people are moving to. So the share of the population that had a move within the county, or like to the share of the people who, the share of people who moved somewhere within the county that were moving there from outside of it is the inward mobility share. So this is people who are coming into your community from outside of it. This is a signal for how attractive the community is to people from abroad. So this it creates an opportunity for bringing new labor in and new skills and new income to circulate through your local economy. The third variable here, and the most important one in this component of the index, weighted at 50%, is the median home value, which tends to be one of the largest drivers of finance for a local economy. And you can see that in this third dimension, which is fiscal growth. Now, fiscal growth is important to maintaining a certain level of services in an economy because the whole economy is expanding. Inflation has been a really big point of discussion over the last few years. And so growth on that fiscal side is important to maintaining or growing services. In that, we measure the total per capita bond in value that is what was existing within a county. So what is available to make different kinds of investments in the county, and how attractive is this to a third party, like outside parties, to grow employment opportunities within the county. The highest weighting here is per capita property tax collections and the growth in that. And then retail sales growth, which tends to be another major contributor to local economy finances. And so again, we see some pretty notable risk factors within Grant County. It ranks in the bottom 20% in government vitality overall, is below that median in economic drivers, and is in the bottom 20% for the overall market growth and growth on the fiscal side. So there are some concerns here. We measure, or we generate the rankings in these indexes by the growth in each of these indicators, but that's not the whole story. The level is important as well, because if you're sitting on top in terms of level, it's really hard to grow faster, right? So I included all of these so we can get a better sense of that. So overall, median home values have grown slower than they have statewide, and the level remains low. Now, while that brings you further down, like in terms of the ranking, that is one of the things that tends to make rural counties attractive to people. One of the largest motivators for people who move into a rural county is home price. That's where the real cost competitiveness for rural counties exists. And so while that brings you further down in ranking, that can actually be an advantage. And when you look at the median home values as a level, the labels are a little bit stacked on top of each other. But that level of the median home value is lower than it is in most of your neighbors, with the exception of Stanton County, which has a lot fewer. So there's some bias in terms of like how these medians get calculated. So in conjunction with other factors, this actually ends up being something that can attract labor to your economy. However, the disadvantage is that it has grown over the last 5 years by less. However, I'm saying however a lot because there's a lot of caveats in here. What that means is perhaps home price inflation has not been as significant in Grant County as it has statewide. Now, everybody has felt home price inflation. But when you compare Grant County to Kearney County or to Haskell County, having a lot lower growth in that median home price can mean that homes are perceived as a lot more affordable locally. So the inward mobility share This is where we do see some risk factors that the county is struggling to attract new people. And in fact, the share of the moves locally were from elsewhere has decreased by 3.5%. And as a level, it's at 0.7% of moves within the county, which is the lowest share, the lowest inward mobility share for the region. We don't have an exact answer on why it is that way, but that's a definite risk factor. And then last in this, the prime age share has declined, and it's slightly below the state average in terms of a level. So that means that overall, the workforce here is perhaps aging out of that prime age range, and there is the risk factor that the workforce's productivity or efficiency may decline. Right. This is actually an effect that is seen in a whole lot of places. There are fundamental changes in the structure of the whole population of the state in terms of their ages, largely because of baby boomers now aging out of that core working age. And so CEDBR, our organization, is the official providers of population forecasts for the census. And we just last year updated our 50-year population forecast. It's available on our website. And so I would encourage everybody to take a look at that if you want to really dive into what the population's trends are going to be over the next 50 years. In short, you are going to have, and this is true pretty much everywhere, a major shift in the age structure of the population, with there being a higher share of the population in older age categories. And that needs to be considered by a lot of economic developers in terms of the kinds of homes that they're bringing to a community, the kinds of services that are made available, because and the amount of healthcare that is the healthcare capacity of the local economy, because all of these things are going to change as the age distribution of the population does. Questions before we move on? All right.
How do you incorporate out of country folks that may not be on the census and that type of population growth?
So this is actually a great time to talk about one of the new developments that we have put into our population forecast, right? We know that there are instances where the population for a particular group, often in rural counties, has been undercounted. We know this, and we've heard this time and again. Hey, we know that the census didn't quite make that estimate right. There's 500 people who are unaccounted for in that count. We built our population forecast in such a way that that is the primary input data, but also we can make forecasts using updated numbers from communities to provide more accurate counts for the county, and B, you can forecast changes of policies. Like we can basically tweak the fundamental inputs. So as a hypothetical, we can say we can add 200 more people of a particular race into the county, and we can see them age up through it. We can see the impact that's going to have on births and deaths over time, and the impact that that's going to have on overall population and employment change in there. So it's a lot more versatile. In essence, that's not factored into here because this is a backwards looking look at the prime age share in the population as reported by the census. But we have the ability to make more accurate forecasts using our population forecast by adding those underrepresented groups back into it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
And you just started using the new forecast model this year, correct? Or last year?
It was an update in this last year, it was mid last year that we
Right.
did this update using the 2021 census ACS data. And in a couple of months here, we're actually going to do the update for 2020 using the 2022 ACS data. And we're going to be doing these updates annually over the next 10 years. We were able to get a contract to help fund that because there is a good bit of grunt work that goes into producing those kinds of forecasts. But we built it in such a way that it can add a whole lot of value to communities who know that there is an error in that census data. Moving on, the market growth. Now, income per capita, that leftmost set of maps in Grant County was below the statewide average in both growth and level. However, it's a little bit more optimistic than is seen in a lot of the other counties in the region. Now, per capita, Stevens County and Kearney County to the north and south have significantly higher income per capitas. But, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that that's just going to be a concentration of higher income groups and higher income housing, like higher value homes into those communities. Is that correct?
Could be one of the reasons.
Sure. Overall output has expanded over the last 5 years, but it has been expanding over the last 5 years, notably slower than the state economy. That's largely due to the change in overall employment. It's harder for output to grow when employment has fallen by as much as it has overall, with the exception of increases in efficiency and changes in automation, which over the last 5 years has not been a huge change in agriculture. Or maybe over the last 10 it has been significant, but now we're kind of at a relatively static level of automation in those core sectors. And then that decline in the current index, we looked at that previously.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to that real quick, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So can you explain how, when you talk about our Gini number and our huge median household income, we had a great, both of those were good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to income per capita. How can we be that much lower if we have a super high household income and we're distributing the money well?
So part of it could be a change in the composition of households. So I do not know what kinds of housing developments there have been and how many houses have been constructed. But if you have a growth in the number of households and people are filling them, then the median household income might decline. So what this could be a signal of is that more people are living in individual households, either because the job market is changing or there is a lack of housing stock that's available. The other thing could be that one of that the largest segment of people who are out migrating are people of lower incomes. So that would leave the higher income groups, or I'm sorry, it's actually the other way around. It would mean that the people who are moving into the county might end up having a lower income, which would mean that the household income might grow if it's multi-party or if it's multiple earner households. But per capita, they're not adding a whole lot of income to the local economy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't have a definite answer on that one, but it would have to be a product of A, the number of households, or B, the income of people who are moving into or out of the county. So in this third dimension here of fiscal growth, we do see some risks on that, except for in per capita property tax collections. Now, there is a positive aspect to this in the fact that per capita property tax collections is the largest fraction for most local economies of their fiscal, like on their fiscal side. So as property tax collections have grown and grown by about 30% here, which is significantly more than any of the surrounding counties, you also have actually a relatively lower level of per capita property tax collections compared to some of the surrounding counties.
And that growth is just going to be since 2018 or?
Yes, all
Okay.
of this is like all of these measured like on the maps, and for our index, it's a 5-year change between 2018 and 2022. And then on the retail sales side, it has had almost bang on the state average in terms of the growth, but as a level, it's a bit lower than the state average and some of the regional averages in terms of per capita retail sales. Now, that is one of the things that can happen there is that different kinds of retail services are available differently throughout a lot of counties. So I don't have a full understanding of what retail is available in Grant County versus some of the others in the region. But the existence of like higher priced sorts of retail into some of those other areas could really drive up the per capita retail sales there while having a decline locally. So that's one that needs further explanation. But overall, it is generally lower as a level and pretty much right on that state averaging growth for that. Any questions here? Okay, so I have thrown a whole lot of data. That's the last slide that I have. So I have thrown a whole lot of data at you, but I want to open it up to questions for any other detail or any other hypotheticals or things that we have missed in
Hey, Jonathan, I've got a question, and that's, what have you seen? I know you've given this to other entities, to other counties, et cetera. What have you seen other entities do with this data?
So,
I mean, I'm talking about it from a perspective of what, I mean, some of this is pretty depressing. So what is it that we do to counter/fix, come up with a plan? How do we, have you seen others do that?
So I have to add a couple of caveats. Okay. So I've only been with the center for 2 years, and I have only given this to a couple of communities, and they have been more recent. So I personally have not had a whole lot of turnaround time for communities to actually make changes based on the data that's been presented. However, one of the ways that we have had discussions with communities in this creates an opportunity for you to like make a positive change is looking at these base indicators and then having more of a deep dive into why like that trend has been in existence. Like, I did not have the answer for you in why income per capita has increased more slowly, but median household income has a lot. So there's a lot more that we could do to dive into why that differential exists. And for example, if the answer is a lack of housing stock that's affordable, that could be an incentive for the community to create like new housing developments targeted towards a specific income group that is perhaps lacking housing stock. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, that's sort of the perfect example of if we decide, and I say we as a community, but
Right.
you know, economic development drives and says we're gonna do 10 new housing units in 2024.
Yeah.
What do the rest of us do as either the business community to support it or city, county to incent it, or, you know, I mean, those are obviously questions we have here internally.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's the best answer I can give you in the general sense is understand that these are high level indicators. Okay. And this is not the whole story. Any one of these elements has a potential multitude of explanations as to why that is. And so a deeper dive into the fundamental reasons why like a particular indicator is like low or bad, and then looking at what the solutions to those specific like driving factors behind it would be like a different kind of study that we could do, or that you could have done as a community. So really identifying the underlying symptoms behind like the indicator. Like a lot of communities, like it has been the case in some communities that they take the answer to anything is bring in higher income jobs or bring in new retail. But if that's not the thing that is keeping growth from happening, it's like trying to put a band-aid on a bullet wound. You might be trying to treat symptoms, but you're still going to bleed to death. So really doing more of a deep dive into the fundamental drivers behind the indicators is something that is very important to making these structural improvements.
And we'll get a copy of these slides, right?
Yeah, I can send that to you as soon as we're done here.
Yeah.
Other questions?
What would be our step as, either Bob or the community to dig deeper into those and to really figure out what the key factors are we need to look at?
So we can set up either a discussion or a meeting like with my boss, Jeremy, who's the director of the center, to look at exploring any of these potential indicators in more depth. We could look at, I don't know if there are any like pending economic development projects that are going on there, but we could do impact assessments. But any kind of research that you're interested in, you can either give me or Jeremy a call or an email, and we can set up a time to discuss the scope of a research project. And I don't want to just limit it to our organization. There are other entities that do this kinds of research, or like doing those kinds of things internally is important as well. But in terms of more deep dives, that is something that we do. And the best way to kind of get that ball rolling is to contact either me or Jeremy with either, a proposal of here's the specific issue we want to know more about. And then we can generate some ideas on how we can research that and get you some usable insights.
I will tell you, Jonathan, that this presentation today with the new way you're doing it was much less jarring than seeing the numbers 104 and 105 plastered over Grant County last year.
Yeah, that was a discussion that Jeremy and I had as we were on the road. Is like a ranking system, it gives you a general impression, but without a sense of where that like where you are based to something more tangible, like a statewide average. A flat ranking, it can cause panic, because I don't remember what Grant County's ranking was in last year's estimates, but based on where it stands now, I'm going to estimate that it was toward the lower, and that can create some like panic. But when you need, but you need to kind of do more of a deep dive into how these indicators are imperfect representations for like different kinds of counties, right? Like I explained with which one was it? The expansion, right? Like the 5-year expansion. Yeah, there was a pretty significant decline in employment overall because of this large scale, long duration rural outmigration effect in that really coarse industry to the local economy of cattle production, beef cattle. You have actually done a whole lot better than would be expected. So these are very high level representations of the economy because it has to be generally applicable to all 105 of them. Yeah. So having a discussion about the real particulars and interpretations of that for a particular county is very valuable, and you can't get that in the 15-minute blurb.
Yeah.
So, I really do appreciate the opportunity to kind of do more of a detailed analysis and discussion on that.
Hey, Jonathan, have you seen any data across the state that shows lower property taxes in county or another being correlated to an economic incentive both for businesses and for residents?
I believe Jeremy has actually done a couple of studies on that. So I was not part of those, so that's not really something that I can speak to all that well. It makes sense from a logical perspective, but looking at an actual correlation, I'm not sure how strongly correlated those are, but it does make sense from a logical perspective.
Jonathan, I think I remember when we were in Ford County that he did talk about that. And I think it's one of those things, and this is just trying to remember from then, but I think he said one of those things that we all think should be attractive, but it doesn't have that much effect. That's my recollection of it.
Yeah, and it depends on the community as well. How much incentive that might be to to prospective, workers or people moving into the county. It's going to depend on other local factors. Are property taxes already really low there? If so, reducing it might not have that high of a marginal effect.
I'll reach out to Jeremy and see what he says on that. I think that's a good question.
On the type of jobs that it seems to be that we're talking about, you're going to be talking about renters anyway.
Yeah.
What was the question?
I just said, in terms of the type of jobs we see moving into this area, they're going to be renters initially anyway. So more than likely, that's like a down the road type of a
concern for them. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but I was also talking about businesses.
100%.
Yeah.
The people that are going to build the house.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, he has talked at length with communities about how a lot of times the answer is not you gotta build more housing. There's like other fundamental issues that are more core to that solution of bringing more people in. With the dramatic increase in home prices that we have seen in a lot of places, it's not necessarily the price of houses. It's the availability of housing, but changes in the composition of households are another major factor, because if people are having more kids and those kids want to move out, they're going to fill up the new housing if they can afford it, right? There's just a lot of moving pieces in there. So unpacking all of that is a bit more detailed of a discussion.
Anybody else have anything? I think we're all stumped at this point, Jonathan.
That tends to happen when you
We're digesting a lot.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we do offer like more detailed kinds of research into specific areas, because and I really do want to leave you with the general impression that while there are a whole lot of fundamental risks that exist within the county, there are particular areas that show a whole lot of opportunity growth, a whole lot of really driving sector for the county resilience. And that's going to be really important to capitalize on going forward, even while trying to address the areas where Grant County has not performed as well as we would hope. And from just a look at these high level numbers, there are insights that you can get, but the causes and solutions to some of these it's not achievable from this detail of a discussion. And so follow-on research is important. We're trying to give you the ammunition, to go and really hunt down those root causes by this look at the high level.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan. We appreciate the time and the information.
Yeah, thank you all for your time. And do not hesitate to reach out to me or to Jeremy about any other research or other presentations you're interested in. Bob, I'll follow up with you by email with these slides, and you can disseminate those as you wish.
Yep, checks in the mail.
Great. Andrea will follow up with you on.
Okay.
All right, y'all have a great day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.